How to lower blood pressure by breathing. Over 1 billion people in the world have high blood pressure, and you can actually lower it by breathing. But the question is, how does that work? How do you do it correctly? And most importantly, how do you do it in such a way that you get long-lasting results? Today we're going to cover 7 different concepts, 7 principles, so that you really understand everything about breathing. And once you truly get the bigger picture, then you can not only lower your blood pressure, but you could literally transform your life. Coming right up. Hey, I'm Dr. Ekberg. I'm a holistic doctor and a former Olympic decathlete. And if you want to truly master health by understanding how the body really works, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell so that you don't miss anything. So just a real quick review on what blood pressure is. Blood pressure is the pressure that results from the heart contracting against the peripheral resistance, against the resistance from your blood vessels out in the body. If you didn't have your heart contract and if you didn't have your vasculature resist, there would be no blood pressure. Dead people have no blood pressure. So the key there to understand is that blood pressure doesn't happen to you. Blood pressure is created with every beat of your heart. The moment your heart stops beating, you have no blood pressure. Normal blood pressure depends on the situation. So resting blood pressure for someone who is upright should be around 120/80. If you're laying down, it should be less because blood flows easier when it doesn't have to overcome gravity. But on the other hand, if you're exercising, you are putting a tremendous demand on your body. You're increasing demand of blood flow and nutrient delivery, so you have to increase your heart rate. You have to increase your blood pressure. It's appropriate when you're exercising. So during intense exercise, you could actually have 220 in blood pressure, and that is normal. So blood pressure is created and it is dependent on the situation. The second thing to understand is that exercise is a form of stress. Stress increases the demand on the body. And when we have stress, it's a matter of balance between what's called your sympathetic and your parasympathetic nervous system. So those are big words. What does that mean? They're also known as fight-flight. Sympathetic is fight-flight, and parasympathetic is known as feed-breed or rest-digest. And what these are, it is your autonomic nervous system, the automatic portion of your nervous system, the part that handles everything that you don't have to think about. It is a resource allocation system. Okay? Blood delivers resources, and your autonomic nervous system decides where the blood goes. So when you're exercising, then most of the blood should go to the muscles because that's where they're needed to perform the work. So your fight-flight system, your sympathetic nervous system, sends most of the blood out to the muscles. And then when you relax, hopefully, then your fight-flight, your sympathetic, can back off and allow your parasympathetic to get some of the blood and send it to your vital organs so that you can digest food and so that you can make immune cells and so that you can heal tissue, so you can have an anabolic function. So the key is to understand that these systems are like a seesaw, that whenever one system increases, the other decreases, because there's only so much blood in the body and you can only send more in one direction at one time. So if you send more one way, you have to borrow from someplace else. So the sympathetic and the parasympathetic, the fight-flight and the feed-breed, it's like a seesaw. It's like you're driving a car. You can't speed up and slow down at the same time. You gotta pick one. And that's what the body does. It allocates the resources depending on the situation. So when you have stress, then it's going to increase your heart rate, It's going to increase your blood pressure, it's going to increase your cortisol and your blood glucose, and on and on and on. When you are relaxing, then resources are made available for your digestion, your immune system, and your healing. So you can defend yourself, you can stress, or you can heal. You just can't do both at the same time. You got to pick one. So number 3 thing to understand is that there are different types of stress. Exercise is physical stress, but we also have what most people talk about when they say stress is emotional stress. So in a sense, we could say that exercise is very appropriate stress, but emotional stress is sort of imaginary stress. It's not really a stress that demands a lot of physical exertion, but your nervous system responds that way just in case. It's going to increase your heart rate, your blood pressure, your blood glucose, your cortisol. Even if you're just sitting in traffic and cursing the gridlock and the traffic jam, when you're getting stressed, your body acts as if it's a physical stress just in case. And if we want to narrow down what emotional stress is in the simplest possible way, the simplest way to describe it is to say that emotional stress is thoughts about the unwanted. Whenever you're thinking about what you don't want, when you're focusing on something that's upsetting, when you're focusing on something that you'd like to be different, then you have emotional stress. And a lot of people will tell me that, well, you know, my life is great. I don't have emotional stress. I don't have any stress. But this is a habit. Most of the stress we're not even aware of because we've done it so much that it became a habit and we learn to live with it and we kind of just push it away and it becomes our norm. It becomes our default baseline. But we still have a lot of sympathetic activation. So that's the very basics that we need to understand why breathing is going to work. So now we get into the breathing, and there's something called heart rate variability. And that's exactly what it sounds like. Your heart rate varies. So when you breathe in, your heart speeds up. When you breathe out, your heart slows down. And again, your body is just so incredibly intelligent. When you breathe in, there's more oxygen in the lungs, so the body speeds up the heart rate to send more blood there to pick up the oxygen because that's more efficient. Then you breathe out, there is less oxygen, so we slow down the heart rate so we're not wasting resources. When you are in harmony, when there is what's called coherence in your nervous system between your brain and your heart, then your heart rate variability is going to be coherent. It's going to form a smooth pattern like a sine wave. So if you measure your average heart rate at 65, then if you have a healthy heart rate variability, it means that when you breathe in, your heart rate is 70. When you breathe out, your heart rate is 60. And the average becomes 65, but it's always going up and down, up and down. And this turns out to be one of the best indicators of overall health that we know of. People who are supremely healthy, they have a fantastic, smooth and large heart rate variability. And people who are not so healthy, they have more what's called an incoherent pattern. So when we're frustrated, when we're angry, then there is no pattern. It's just jagged lines. Every heartbeat is sort of chaotic and mismatched. It's all over the place. So this would be a very healthy pattern, and this would be a very unhealthy pattern. And the great thing is that you can influence this. You can practice it and learn it and get it better. And the way to do that is to pay attention to your breathing pattern. Most people, if you don't tell them anything, you just tell them to kind of sit around and relax and you count their breaths, you observe their breaths, then most people are going to breathe in for about 2 seconds. So in, 1, 2, and out, 1. In, 1, 2, and out, 1. And that's about 20 breaths per minute. And even if they're reasonably relaxed, so it's not a terribly incoherent pattern, it's still going to be too fast a pattern. So if we're breathing 20 times per minute, it's not enough time for the body to relax. There's not enough time for the body to kick in the parasympathetic. So it's like we're getting breathing in and we get sympathetic, we start breathing out, but before we're done, it's breathe in and breathe in. So there's way too many breaths. So if we have sympathetic on the upscale and parasympathetic on the downscale here, then the breathing pattern would be all sympathetic. The red here would be all sympathetic because it's in and out, in and out, in and out, in and out. Doesn't give the body time to relax and for the parasympathetic nervous system to engage. But if we slow the breath down, if we breathe in for 4 seconds and out for 5 seconds, we breathe approximately equal. We breathe slower overall. We breathe approximately equal, but a little bit longer on the out breath. Now we create balance between the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system. So it's not that one is good and the other is bad. It's like everything else in the body. There needs to be balance. With this pattern, we can start practicing that balance. And the very first thing that happens when we start paying attention to our breathing pattern, when we slow our breath down and we pay attention to the in-breath and we pay attention to the out-breath, is we change our focus. And that may seem like a small thing, but it is one of the biggest things there is. And we'll try it in just a second here, but when you pay attention to your breath, you can no longer, at the same time, think about what's unwanted. Try it. If you're stressed, you're thinking about the kids or the deadline, and then you pay attention to your breath, then for just a fleeting moment, you didn't think about that other thing. And that is, like I said, may seem like a small thing, but that is an incredibly powerful principle, that you're no longer doing that thing that keeps you in your state of emotional stress. And if you do enough of that, you can break the pattern. And now that we break the pattern, we need to understand what neuroplasticity is. So a lot of people, they say, oh yeah, I tried your breathing and it felt great. I did it 3 months ago, I tried it once and I did it for 5 minutes and I felt great. But the next day it was the same thing over. And they're not understanding the principle of neuroplasticity. They're not understanding the principle of habit and momentum. Don't be like the person who says, oh, diets don't work. I ate a carrot once and nothing happened. All right? That's ridiculous. It's not about what we do once in a blue moon. It's about what we develop as a lifestyle. It's what becomes a pattern in our life. So neuroplasticity means that when you practice something and it becomes a skill, when you practice it enough to become a skill, and then you maintain that skill, then you actually reconfigure the tissue in your brain. Your neural pathways become different. A neural pathway that you practice, that you use a lot, it becomes thicker. Think of it as walking across a lawn. If you just walk across a lawn once, then you bend the blades of grass and then immediately they stand up and it's like you never walked across. If you walk across 100 times, now the grass is going to look a little flat and you can start discerning a pathway. And if you walk across 100 times every day, then the grass is not going to be there. There's going to be a pathway. And that's exactly how it works in your nervous system, that the things you do more of become pathways. They become larger pathways. And if you do it enough, it becomes a superhighway that has traffic on it whether you think about it or not. This is exactly the principle that's in place when you're right-handed versus left-handed. Okay? You think someone tells you to write something down and you grab the pen in your preferred hand and you just start writing without thinking. But if they tell you to switch hands, all of a sudden you have no idea what to do. You have to focus intensely and it's going to go super slow and it's not going to be pretty. Why? Is it because you don't know how? No, you understand the mechanics, but you haven't developed the skill. The pathway isn't there. The neuromotor patterns aren't developed. Another way of thinking about that is like a concert pianist. Just because you practice on the piano for 5 minutes doesn't mean you know how to play piano. But if you play a few hours every day for 20 years, all of a sudden you can play and have a conversation at the same time. You've developed so many pathways that it's going on automatic. That's what neuroplasticity is. Understand that stress is the same way. Your habit, your habitual way of focusing on things you don't want is a habit. Emotional stress is a habit, and you can develop a skill, you can develop a momentum that's the opposite of that habit, and then that habit goes away. So what that means is it's going to be as good as what you put into it. And my recommendation would be to do it once or twice a day for 5 to 10 minutes, and I want you to do it until you notice results. And you'll start noticing results very, very soon, but if you stop then, the habit goes away. So I would say set your goal to do it for at least 6 months, because if you do it 6 months, you're probably in the habit that you'll keep doing it forever. And once you have that kind of habit, once you have that pattern, chances are that you will even start breathing, you'll even get into that emotional state when you're not thinking about it. It becomes your norm, regardless of where you are. You can do it in school, you can be that way in business meetings, in sales meetings, wherever you are with the kids screaming at you, you can still be that way. So the number 7 principle to understand is that the benefits to this are endless. It may seem like I'm over-promising, but if you truly understand that your sympathetic and your parasympathetic, that is what your autonomic nervous system is. That is what your health is. That is the system that determines how you function. It determines everything about you. So if you do this on a regular basis, it's not just that your blood pressure goes down, you are rewiring all of you. So what you will find is that, sure, your blood pressure will go down, but so will your cortisol, and so will your insulin resistance. And your circulation will improve. So all of a sudden you end up with warm hands. Your digestion will improve. You will get more nutrients out of your food. We spent all of our time talking about what to eat, but how do we digest it? Well, we digest it by activating our parasympathetic nervous system. Immune function. You have fewer colds and flus. You heal better. Even your fertility is a matter of sympathetic versus parasympathetic, because you can't get pregnant when you're stressed. Your body says, hey, this is not a good place to get pregnant. We better wait till it's safe to have a kid. If you have sweaty hands, if you suffer from hyperhidrosis, whether it's sweating in the palm or under the arms, that's stress. If you practice activating your parasympathetic nervous system, that will go away. How quickly? For some people, it'll happen in a week. For some people, it will take 6 months. So don't stop after a week. Because when you're doing this, you're sending more blood to the frontal lobe and to the cortex of your brain, you also are probably going to notice that your focus gets better, your memory gets better, and the list is endless. Pretty much anything you want, you can put it on that list. And if you get your sympathetic and parasympathetic in balance, it's going to improve. So even though this is a video about how to lower blood pressure, I want you to start looking at the bigger picture of holistic health, that there aren't little subcompartments of function. The nervous system, your body, your organism works as a whole. When you truly improve an aspect by helping the foundation of it, you're automatically going to get a trickle-down effect that's going to improve multiple things.
Hey guys, if you have a computer, Wi-Fi, and a kitchen table, you have exactly what you need to quit your job. So keep watching, because in this video we're going to share with you exactly what we did to take back the control of our time and our finances.
So now for the patient ones who are still sticking around or watching the whole thing because you're serious about your health and understanding, let's do a little breathing session. So you could do this to yourself, you don't have to count out loud, but here's just an example of how that would work. You count, breathe in, 2, 3, 4, and out, 2, 3, 4, 5, and in, 2, 3, 4, and out, 2, 3, 4, 5, and in, 2, 3, 4, and out, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay? Now, what you want to think about is it is a little bit deeper breath than a shallow breath, like a normal shallow breath that a lot of people have, but it's not filling your lungs to full capacity. It's not deep breathing. It's not panting. It is just a little bit deeper. And you want to initiate, you want to breathe from your belly. So a good way of doing it is to put your hand on your belly. And as you breathe in, you notice your hand rising. You notice your belly expanding. So the first part of the breath, your hand is rising, your belly is expanding, and then the first half of the breath is that, and then slowly and gently you allow the breath to rise into your rib cage and expand your lungs and your chest just a little bit, and then you relax and just let it out very, very slowly. And if you breathe through your nose, which I recommend, then there should be no sound. At no point should you breathe hard enough to make a sound. It should be completely quiet, both in and out. And think of it as a sine wave, as valleys and peaks. And when you're breathing in at the top, there's going to be a moment where you don't notice, you're not sure if you're breathing in or out. It's just kind of like hanging there. And then you breathe out slowly and silently. And then at the bottom, there is a moment where you're not sure if you're breathing in or out. And then all of a sudden, the breath is just happening by itself again. And again, it's slow and silent. You don't want to start using your shoulders. You don't want to get into raising your shoulders when you breathe, because that's a stress response. Okay? You're backfiring on your parasympathetic activation if you raise your shoulders. That this is a stress response. When we get attacked as part of fight-flight, we bring the shoulders up. That's why stress causes shoulder and neck stiffness. So keep your shoulders relaxed, breathe from the belly, allow the breath to rise very gently and slightly into the chest, and then out again. So let's try that just one more time. Breathe in, 2, 3, 4, and out, 2, 3, 4, 5, and in, 2, 3, 4, and out, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay? So there's some tools, there's some toys on the market you can buy to help you breathe, so you can learn to breathe, so you can get some feedback if you're doing it right, but you don't need any expensive tools. If you want them, great, they can be fun to play with, but if you just pay attention, you'll get all the same benefits anyway. If you like this video, I'm sure you're going to love that one. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Hello, health champions. Today we're going to talk about how to lose belly fat. How do we burn that fat as fast as possible? And I don't know about you, but it drives me absolutely crazy with all of the bad and useless information out there. Is it about carb, fat, or protein? Do we eat a little? Do we eat a lot? And can we do crunches to target belly fat or hip fat or thigh fat? No, you can't do that. It doesn't work like that. And maybe the worst, all these videos that say take a tablespoon of this or a pinch of that and all your problems will go away. Now, what happens when people get bad information and conflicting information is they get confused and they don't stick with it. They don't stay the course, or even worse, they do nothing at all. But after watching this video, you will know for sure how certain things work, and you will know enough that you can take some action and stick with it and get the results you want. A really good question to start with is, why would the body burn fat? Or the reverse maybe for some. Why would the body not burn fat? Why is the body refusing to burn fat? Why am I on this plateau all the time? And one reason could be that the body doesn't need to burn fat. And we're talking about the body fat, the fat that is stored on the body as a reserve. And if you never need to tap into the reserves, then obviously you're not going to burn it if there's always more fuel being supplied than what you're using up. Another reason could be that there are other types of fuel, or the timing of the fuel, that something else needs to be burned first before we get to the body fat. So we have to understand that in the order of things, the dietary carbohydrates that we eat have to burn first. The body has to use that first. And then it gets to dietary fats, and then it gets to the body fat. So what we need to do is to create a state in the body where, first of all, there's a need for energy. And secondly, where that need for energy doesn't result in an increased appetite. If we use more energy and then we just compensate by eating more, then it's a zero-sum game. And also, of course, we want to give the body a reason. At the cellular level, we need to give the body a reason to use up that body fat. And of course, it also needs to be sustainable. It needs to be something that you can do for the rest of your life. And we want to put health first. We want to do this to enhance health, not at the expense of health. And when we say extremely fast, that's a relative term. And why am I saying that? Because if you're on a bicycle, you don't want to compare yourself to a Formula One race car. So do this as fast as possible for you. And what that means is you want to start understanding the different mechanisms and factors that enhance fat burning and what stops fat burning. And then once you understand them, now you implement them and you do all of them at once, at the same time, for a period of time. Because if you do one thing and it gets a little bit of results, then if you add another thing, now it's like compound interest. How can we affect the need for energy? Well, first of all, we have our basal metabolic rate, and that's how much energy the body uses up when you do nothing. When you're sitting around, when you're sleeping, your organs are always doing some work. Your heart, your liver, your kidneys, they're doing what they're supposed to do, and they're using up some energy in doing that. And then there are some hormones, insulin and human growth hormone, that we'll talk a little bit more about, that also affect this basal metabolic rate. And then above that baseline, we add the energy required for movement. So anytime that you move and do something physical, now you're using up a little bit more energy than the basal rate. And now you have basic movement, which is just going about your daily life, getting from the couch to the fridge, from the bed to the bathroom, from the car over to work, and so forth. And then you add in exercise. And that's something that you do on purpose to increase your circulation and your movement. One problem a lot of people run into when they exercise more is that they eat more. And One underlying factor here that we have to control is insulin resistance, because if you have chronically high levels of insulin, meaning insulin stays high even when you're not eating, then that high level of insulin blocks fat burning. It prevents you from getting to the fat you have stored. And if you can't get to it, then you get hungry. So the whole idea of using more energy and burning fat is that we can get to the body fat stores, but with high insulin, we can't. Another factor we have to control is stress. Because when stress is high, that's your perception of the world telling your body that there's something fearful, there's something dangerous out there, and I need to be prepared in case that thing attacks me. And if it attacks me, I might have to run really, really fast, and if I have to run fast, I need emergency fuel, which is glucose. You always have a baseline of fat that you're burning, but the more stress you have, the more you're going to shift into glucose to do that. And then you're going to release cortisol, which is a stress hormone, which also drives more insulin. And a third big factor is carb dependence. If you're dependent on carbohydrate, if you have trained your body to always receive a fresh, big, full supply of carbohydrate, your body is always going to burn that first, and it will never get around to burning that fat. So the combination of all these three factors makes it very difficult to control your appetite. Willpower is just not going to be enough in the long run. And then we need to give the body a reason at the cellular level to use up, to burn through some fat. And we have to ask that question. Why would the body do that? Or why wouldn't it? If we assume the body is supremely intelligent, which it is, then it's going to need a reason. There's a reason for everything it does. I mean, you wouldn't, for example, go and mow your lawn today if you already finished it yesterday. I mean, nobody would do that. Well, actually, my neighbor tends to do that anyway, but you know what I mean. That in the body, everything happens for a reason. So, dietary carbohydrates have to be burned first. Carbs turn into blood sugar, and really high blood sugar can put you into a coma. The brain can't function with high or low levels of blood sugar. So they have to be processed through first. And some of it can be put into glycogen storage, but the body can't store a whole lot. So it's going to try to burn through both carbs and glycogen first. And then it's going to start in on the dietary fat, the stuff that you ate earlier today or late yesterday that's still floating around. And only after most of that is gone and processed through is it going to get to body fat. And also we want to understand that this is not an absolute. It's not going to use 100% of number 1 and 100% of number 2 before it ever gets to 3 and 4. It's a tendency. The percentages are shifting. It's a trend. So this is basically the priority. And here's the action plan, and we'll talk about these in more detail. First, you cut sugar, then you reduce carbs, you exercise, meditate. We're going to talk about protein, then you add some fat, you get into ketosis because that is fat burning, and we're going to talk about fasting. First of all, we cut out the sugar. Why is that? Because it is addictive. It's a drug. And if it's addictive, then you're going to overindulge. By definition, an addiction is something that you use more of than you want. So you're going to overeat because of sugar. Secondly, it's also a carbohydrate. It's 100% carbohydrate. It triggers insulin through the glucose, but it also clogs the liver through the fructose, and it causes non-alcoholic fatty liver disease and insulin resistance, because the liver is your metabolic factory, and once you clog up that liver, then it's going to kind of spill over to the rest of the body, and that's one of the driving mechanisms behind insulin resistance. And then you want to reduce carbohydrates overall because they are in a way addictive, not as strongly as sugar for the most part, but they do cause overeating, definitely. They do trigger insulin, definitely. And whenever insulin is high, it prevents fat burning. But also, like we said, when carbs are present, you're going to burn those first before you ever get to fat burning. Therefore, you want to keep your carbohydrates probably less than 30 net grams. And that's not an absolute number because it's going to differ for different people. A lot of people can get into fat burning once they're under 50 grams, but other people need to get down to maybe 10 or 15 grams of carbohydrate before their body really starts burning up that fat. And here is a carbohydrate that you can eat because this has such a negligible impact on insulin. You're not going to overeat it. It's not really addictive. It doesn't really count as a carbohydrate if it's high water, high fiber, and very low carb. Next, you want to increase your exercise because exercise is good for so many different reasons. Your whole physiology is driven by exercise. And, of course, you will increase your energy need. You're going to use up more energy. That in itself is not going to help you burn belly fat because unless you also work on insulin resistance, you will compensate by eating more. So the key is to do this, to exercise without increasing appetite. So on the one hand, that's about food. On the other, it's about doing the right type of exercise. And you want to do the vast majority, 95, 98% of your exercise as aerobic, meaning it's with air. It's at a low intensity, like walking or biking at a pleasant rate, so you don't get winded, so you don't start huffing and puffing. The other type of exercise is called anaerobic. That means without air. You increase the intensity to where the oxygen in the air can't keep up, and now you have to start breaking down glucose to make lactic acid. And this is a stressful state, and there's a reason, there's a purpose for it. But if you do this and trying to burn fat, you want to try to keep that to a minimum. They should be very, very short. If you do intervals, it should last a few seconds. If you do one interval, it could be a minute or two, and then you're done. If you overdo it, you're going to create a lot of stress. So anaerobic uses up carbohydrates because once you get to that level, you have to break down glucose to create that energy when you don't have enough air. Now, some people might ask, wouldn't that be a good thing? If you use up the carbohydrates, doesn't that mean you can start burning the fat instead? And theoretically, it would, except when you do that, when you create a stressful state through this anaerobic exercise, if you do too much of it, now your body is going to be desperately trying to replenish those carbohydrates. It's going to be something that's beyond your willpower. And it's no good using up the carbs if your body is just going to go look for more and give you cravings. I often mention meditation because I think it can make you feel better overall. I think it can help you with your purpose and your well-being in life, but it also has an impact on metabolism and metabolic health because stress, like we said, it requires emergency fuel. When you're in a state of stress, your body thinks it's going to need emergency fuel, and that means carbohydrates and glucose. And it can also increase cortisol as a way of increasing that glucose. Now it's going to start breaking down protein and glycogen and so forth to raise that glucose, and that, of course, drives insulin. But most of all, it's going to give you cravings. Whenever you are stressed, you're going to tend to go look for sugary things, for comfort foods, for things you're addicted to change how you feel. And meditation will help you reduce that stress and cope and deal with all of those factors. When we start a low-carb, high-fat diet, where does protein fit in? A lot of people are told and they hear that you should eat moderate protein. And why do we even worry about protein? Because protein is glucogenic. That means it can become glucose. You can turn protein into blood sugar. And a lot of the protein you eat, the purpose of protein is to become building blocks, but the excess protein. When you eat way more protein than your body needs for parts, then the rest is going to become glucose. And therefore, theoretically, protein can drive blood sugar and insulin, and it can keep you out of fat burning. So when it comes to meat, you want to do the exact opposite of what you've been told for the last 40, 50 years. You actually want to avoid the lean meat. So when they tell you to eat the lean chicken breast, then you cut that out instead. And why is that? Because the leaner the meat is, the more you tend to overeat on the protein. Most people get enough protein. You just don't want to overdo it. So instead, what you want to do is you eat the fatty meat, the fish, the pork, the chicken, whatever meat you're eating. If it's ground beef or steak, you look for the fattiest, healthy cut that you can find, because then it's going to be so much more satisfying and so much more filling that you're not going to eat as much. And you're not going to overdo the protein even if you go like 100% carnivore. So when I eat chicken, it's typically going to be chicken wings, or I will also eat chicken thighs. If I can get them with skin, that's great. If not, I'll typically add some butter or olive oil or avocado or something to the food. And the reason that we're told to eat the lean stuff in the first place is that we have this phobia of saturated fat. But saturated fat is not the problem. Saturated fat is a good fuel source. It is very stable. It doesn't oxidize. It doesn't get rancid. It doesn't create inflammation. What creates inflammation is insulin. Insulin is the problem that we're after all the time. And the carbohydrates drive insulin, which high levels of insulin over time drive insulin resistance. So all of these three factors is what's producing the chronic disease. And what we have to point out also is that it's not carbs per se, it's too much carbs. And how much is too much? Well, it depends on the person. If you don't have any of these problems, then you're not eating too much carbs. But if you have these problems, then you are eating too many carbs for you. Next step is to add in some good fat. You want to be in ketosis. That's what the keto diet is all about. And it's not about bacon and cheese crisps and all that stuff. It's still about whole food. And ketosis simply means that you're in a state of fat burning. And that's the goal after all. That means you're typically going to have less than 5% from carbohydrates, 5% of your calories. That means with moderate protein, you can still have a lot of steak if you keep it fatty steak or chicken or ground beef. And then you'll have 15 to 20% of your calories from protein, and then fat is the rest. Whatever else you need to eat to get satisfied and full, then that becomes fat. But when does that fat become too much? And there's a fine line here that we want to be aware of, that the whole point is to burn body fat. And the fine line depends on the person. And if you eat so much dietary fat that the body sees no reason to use anything stored on the body, then you're eating too much fat. And then you need to cut back on the dietary fat until your body starts burning some body fat. So this is where everyone's different, and you need to play with it a little bit, because at some point, if you cut out too much fat, it could lead to starvation. If you're hungry, if your body feels deprived, if it's not working well, then you're not eating enough. So it's a good idea to eat a little bit more to start with and then slowly back off. And the way that you want to deal with this is to reduce appetite. Because if you do this the right way and your insulin resistance goes down and you get into fat burning, your body is still eating. It's just eating fat off the body instead of the dietary fat. And you just need to teach it that. So if it's burning body fat, you're not starving. And now you're not in a starvation that's going to shut down your metabolism or create any harm. And the most powerful, the most potent way that you could possibly burn body fat, belly fat, extremely fast is fasting, because we talked about carbs. Well, when you're fasting, you're eating 0 carbs. There are no dietary carbs. And you're also not eating any dietary fat, right? So the only way that the body can generate energy at this point is to burn the body fat. At the same time, fasting is the most powerful way to reduce insulin and insulin resistance and reverse metabolic disease. And it's one of the most powerful ways to increase growth hormone, human growth hormone, which is a fat burning hormone. And once you get into fat burning, you can monitor that. You can measure your level of ketones to see how effective this is for you. And then some additional tools that we talked about. If you do the fasting or intermittent fasting, which we'll talk about in a second, and then you combine that with a ketogenic, with a low carb, high fat diet, and maybe even add in some exercise all at the same time, now you can drive your body to higher levels of ketones. If you only did a low carb diet, then you might be at 0.8 to 1.5 or something for most people. If you add fasting and exercise, you could get that into much, much higher levels of ketones, like 4, 5, 6, or 7. And you get much faster burning of body fat, but also much faster reversal of insulin resistance and even some chronic disease conditions. Unfortunately, as great as fasting is, it has a limitation. There comes a time where you just have to eat again. And that's where we want to start looking and understanding the balance with all of this. So I would suggest, first of all, that you cut back on the carbs to the point where you become fat adapted. If you don't provide the carbohydrates for fuel, your body has to start learning, has to rewire to use fat again. And then you start playing with something called intermittent fasting, where you get a lot of the benefits, but it's more time restricted. You eat certain periods and you fast certain periods instead of eating all the time. So first thing you would do is you have breakfast later. And this isn't the only way to do it. It's just an example that works well for a lot of people. So whatever your time for breakfast is, you start moving it later. Whatever time your dinner is, you start moving it earlier. And you do this gradually, and you find it so much easier than you really thought it would be, until you can skip breakfast altogether because it kind of coincides with lunch. And then you keep moving this until you're eating in a 4, 5, 6 hour time window. And the rest of the time you're fasting, but you'd be amazed how easy this is. Your body is so well equipped, it knows exactly how to do this. And if you give it some time and you're consistent, you will find that eventually you will probably want to skip lunch, and then you're at what's called OMAD, 1 meal a day. And it all depends on your physiology, on your genetics, how fast you want to get things done. Some people get really fast results with 2 meals a day. Some people say, hey, that's not fast enough, or my body is really stubborn, and they want to go to 1 meal a day. And once you're used to that, you can also play around with a few longer fasts. And this is not something you do all the time, but you can go 48 hours or 72 hours, maybe once every 2 weeks, maybe once a month. You play around with it and see how you feel. And then I have to tell you about a huge dream of mine that is about to come true. My mission and purpose and passion has always been to get the message of health out, to teach people how the body works, how amazing the body is, that if we just give it the right resources and remove some interference, the body is capable of healing amazing things. And through YouTube, I've been able to get a lot of that message out to a lot of people. But I also am so passionate about having a local presence and being able to have my hands-on people and do things one-on-one. And for about 10 years, I've been in a small, nice office, but it's been very limiting because I haven't had all the resources available. So for the last couple of years, I've worked on developing a new clinic, and this is a picture of it. It's in